In this video, I'm gonna talk about the top 5 baits that I fish in the month of June. I will not leave home without having these baits, starting with number 1, which is a topwater. There are a lot of different topwaters that you can use during the month of June, but no matter where I go, I have some sort of topwater with me at all times. And something that I know that I have seen a lot here where I live in the Midwest is when I start to see the cottonwood trees start to bloom, you start to see that cotton or whatever falling from the trees. Usually during that same time period, there is a really good topwater bite. And for me, that happens a lot in early June. Now, the big thing when it comes to different topwaters is I really want to fit the topwater that I am using to kind of the conditions, to the cover, to the type of lake that I may be fishing. For example, if I'm fishing around a lot of grass cover, a lot of vegetation, maybe I'm fishing in a pond and I'm fishing around some scum mats that are starting to develop during this time of the year, I'm absolutely going to have some sort of frog with me like this one right here. This is a Berkeley Swamp Lord. Now there's a ton of different really good frogs on the market. This is one that I have just fished a lot over the last couple of years. Now, if I'm fishing in a little bit more open water situations, maybe I'm fishing in a larger, clearer reservoir that has a lot of shad, in that situation, I might really want to fish a walking style topwater bait. You know, something like a Strike King Sexy Dog. Something I see a lot in June is you typically have a bluegill spawn that is really starting to happen in June. So if I'm around a full moon in the month of June and there's a bluegill spawn happening on my lake, a lot of times I like to pick up a topwater popper, something that is kind of a bluegill colored bait. So no matter where you go in the month of June, I always have a topwater in hand and with me. We obviously know that topwater is a very fun way to catch fish, but it also tends to catch some of the biggest bass that live in our lakes and in our ponds and in our rivers. So I always have a topwater, and it's not just restricted to those. There's a ton of different topwaters that you can use this time of the year, but always have a topwater with you in the boat. This video is brought to you by Omnia Fishing. If you guys are looking for a place to pick up all the tackle that I'm going to be talking about in this video, please consider checking out Omnia. Also, Omnia is not just a tackle shop, it is a complete resource for us as bass fishermen. So if you guys are maybe going to a new lake and want to check out some local fishing reports, Omnia has a great fishing reports page. If maybe you're wanting to look at some high definition maps that you can actually put different layers over, like wind and water temperature, Omnia's Pro app is the way to go. So I'm gonna leave some links down below in the description for Omnia. Check them out. The next one that I am extremely fond of, again, I will not leave home without, is some sort of big plastic worm of some sort. A big worm on a Texas rig is by far a bait that really I'm gonna pick it up in June, and I'm really not gonna put it down probably until the end of September when a little bit colder weather starts to settle in. I really love a big Texas worm, and it's not just for deep water fishing. I think that a lot of guys, there's kind of a misconception that a big, 10.5, 11-inch worm, this is actually a blitz worm by X-Zone. It's an 11-inch worm. A lot of people think that this is only an offshore technique. And while I absolutely love it, offshore, fishing around, fish that are kind of getting to their summer areas, on rock piles, on ledges, in brush piles, on shell beds. Although I love fishing it there, it's also a bait that a lot of fish have not seen in shallow water. And if there's anything that you can do in bass fishing that is going to help you to get more bites, it's by fishing things that other guys are not fishing. If you're in a very highly pressured body of water, fishing a bait like a big Texas rig worm in shallow water is not something a lot of fish have seen. A lot of times we're in shallow water. If you have a Texas rig with you, it's typically a more smaller and compact bait. Baits like the newer Bronco bug, baits like a sweet beaver. And those are great baits. And I'm not saying that they won't catch fish, but when a lot of guys have been fishing shallow, which they have been doing all throughout April, all throughout May, those fish have seen a lot of the exact same baits. So if you provide them with something that is a little bit different, it can help you to get bit even in shallow water. Now, I not only like the X-Zone, big worm, but I also like a Zoom Old Monster. It is a phenomenal worm. I really have grown a little bit more fond of the X-Zone one over the last year or so, just because this bait actually floats. I mean, it says right there on the package that it floats. When you're fishing this and you're dragging it on offshore cover, or even if you're pitching it into cover, wherever it may be, I do like for that tail to kind of stand up off the bottom. And so I do think it helps you to get a few more bites. Sometimes it doesn't matter, right? Sometimes bass are fairly aggressive and it does not matter what you throw at them, they're gonna bite it. But sometimes I do think with that tail kind of standing up in certain cover situations or down there on offshore structure can help you to get a few more bites. Now, my number one color that I throw is this one right here. This is what is called a plum color. I basically throw this, I would say, 80% of the time. If I feel like I'm not getting bit on this one a lot, I'll actually let's grab it right here. This is a green pumpkin, the good old green pumpkin. I will throw a green pumpkin a lot. It catches fish. These two baits account for about 99% of the big worm fishing that I do. The only other color that I will throw, and this tends to be a little bit more of a Florida thing, or if you fish in water that has a lot of that tannic color water, that water that is very tea colored. Bass that live in that tea colored tannic water love June bug. They love June bug. And so I do have some June bug worms that I will throw as well, but it's absolutely a bait that you have to have in the month of June. Now, another thing that I love to do, like I said, a lot of fish are getting to offshore structure during this time of the year. And this next bait is really designated for a lot of offshore fishing. But when those fish first get to some of their offshore structures that you're going to catch them on maybe for the next month or so, it seems like they are just a little bit more aggressive at times. And I've actually seen, over the years, I was fortunate to grow up with a pond in my backyard where I used to live with my parents. I'm going to be honest with you. I transported a lot of lake fish from different lakes and put them in that pond. Now, one thing that I noticed, which was really unique and was really cool, is that I would almost always catch that bass that I transported to that lake within about a week of me putting it in there. And what I feel like happens is that a lot of times when a bass gets to a new situation, a new area, they tend to be testing out their surroundings a lot versus if they have been there for a long time. And I think that's partly why I would always catch a fish very quickly when I would put it in a pond. They tend to just be a little bit more aggressive. They're trying to figure out the area that are in. Now, I have kind of taken that same theory and put it to a lot of my lake fishing. Because I feel like when bass make a transition from one place to another, when they first get to that place, they are very, very aggressive. We see this a lot in the pre-spawn. When bass go from deep water to shallow water, you catch them on square bills, lipless crankbaits, chatterbaits, spinnerbaits. You catch them on very loud, vibrating lures. Now, when they go from shallow to deep water, which is what we're talking about right now, because again, we're talking about June fishing, they sometimes really love really loud, really, fast lures. And that is when I'm going to pick up a deep diving crankbait of some sort. I love to fish a deep diving crankbait. If there was 1 month that I could fish this bait in, it would be the month of June. I've gotten on some of the most unreal bites on different bodies of water in June, and a lot of them have come down to fishing a deep diving crankbait. Now, what I have found out about these baits is that if you get on a good deep diving crankbait bite, you're going to be catching the biggest bass that live in your lake. Like it's kind of like jig fishing at times. When you fish a jig, and we're going to talk actually about a jig here in a minute, but when you fish a jig, a lot of times it seems like you're fishing for a little bit better average fish. When you get on a deep crankbait bite, it seems like the biggest bass in the lake will absolutely respond, and you can be able to catch them on a deep diving crankbait. Now, the one thing that I find that I don't put a lot of emphasis on is color. When it comes to a deep diving crankbait, I think that it's primarily a reaction bite. It's primarily that bait's deflecting off something and that bass gets it. Most of the time when I fish these baits, I'm gonna make a super long cast and I'm ripping this thing across the bottom. I mean, about cranking it as fast as I can. And that's when they get it. Now, there are two colors that I do like, and it's these two ones right here. I have a good old sexy shad color, and I have kind of this bluer, powder blue top with a chartreuse side. To me, when I remember when I first started fishing, I always thought that this type of color was really reserved for muddy water fishing. But I found out that this is a great deep diving crankbait color in clear water. And if I'm being honest with you, I don't really know why. I think that it glows a little bit more down there in the deep water and that it just attracts bass. It may not matter at all if I'm being 100% honest with you, but these two colors are the ones that I pick up most of the time when I'm fishing a deep diving crankbait. Now, when it comes to fishing a deep diving crankbait, the most important thing that you can realize, the most important thing about deep cranking is baits that have sound to them and baits that have a lot of rattles to them. I have seen this time and time again, that you will fish a bait that has a lot of rattles and you are getting very few bites, if any bites. You switch over to a bait that is silent, you bring it through that same exact area and you will catch fish after fish after fish after fish. So, and it may be the exact opposite at times. A lot of times they are responding to baits that have rattles. So when I'm on a deep diving crankbait, personally, I like to have two rod and reel setups so that I can have a loud bait on one hand, on one rod, and a silent bait on the other hand. But if I had to go with one, I would actually pick the silent baits most of the time. This is a Strike King 6XD. It's probably my favorite deep crankbait that I've used. This is a silent version. This is the Rapala DT16, the DT16, the DT20. They are great baits. They are a lot more silent than a lot of the other baits as well. So these are baits that I throw a ton. I love getting on a deep diving crankbait bite. You will catch some of the biggest bass that live in your lakes. Now, let's move on to lure number 4. Out of all the lures that I am talking about, this is probably the most versatile of the bunch, and that is some sort of jig. There's a ton of really good jigs out there on the market. These are the few that I really, really like, the ones that I love. When it comes to doing just general jig fishing, I really like the Outcast Tackle Cage Fighter jig. This is a tungsten jig. It's a little bit more finessey of a jig, which is probably why I use it a lot here in the Midwest, because our fish, you know, they're not always giant fish around this region, although there are a lot of big ones and the big ones will eat a jig, but this thing just gets a ton of bites. And it's a very compact jig that I throw a lot. Now I'm typically gonna throw it with a 3/8 ounce or a 1/2 ounce. Those are probably my two go-tos on that one. Another really good jig is the Denny Brauer structure jig. This is made by Strike King. This is another really good all-around jig. You can swim it, you can flip it in cover, you can do a little bit of everything. Now this has a little bit bigger presence in the water than the Outcast Tackle jig. So if I know that I'm fishing around a little bit bigger bass, if I just want a bigger presence, then I might throw the structure jig more times than not. Now if I'm fishing offshore cover, I like some sort of football jig. And a football jig that I've actually grown to like a lot is actually the Berkley football jig. I really like the hook that is in this jig. I feel like I lose very few fish on this jig in general. And I'm going to use this a lot in some of the same situations where I would use that big old monster style worm that we talked about earlier, dragging it on deeper rock, in a brush pile, on any type of offshore structure. This becomes one of my go-tos in that situation. Again, I'm gonna go with a 1/2 ounce to a 3/4 ounce jig in that. Now the next jig is my heavy cover jig. This is the one that I have, this is a big bass bait. If I'm fishing in a lot of heavy cover, most of the time heavy vegetation, maybe it's thick lily pads, maybe it's thick hydrilla, milfoil, coontail grass. If it's a thicker grass, I really like this Hack Attack jig. I am going to fish this thing on straight braid most of the time. This is a 1 ounce weight, so it's going to be able to punch through a lot of thick cover and get to where the bass is hiding. But I use these jigs in a lot of different ways. Like I said, they're very versatile. So sometimes I'll be fishing it in 30 foot of water. I'll be fishing that football jig in 30 foot of water. Sometimes I'll be swimming a jig up shallow. You know, there's a lot of fish that are hanging around bluegill beds during the month of June, and swimming a jig is a great way to catch those fish. Or I might be, like I said, punching it into heavy cover. Now, regardless, this time of the year in June, you're dealing with a lot of warm water. So when it comes to the trailer that I'm going to use on the back of a jig, this is pretty much the one that I'm going to go to with. This is a Strike King Rage Crawl. So this has a lot more flap to it than kind of your chunk style trailers. Some guys will put a beaver style bait on the back of a jig. In the summertime in hot water, I like a lot of action. And so a Rage Crawl has been the one that I have put on most of the time. Also, a Rage Crawl, if you take it out of the package, it's actually a little bit thicker. It's a little bit wider is what I should say. Not necessarily thicker. It's a little bit wider in diameter than some of your other crawl style trailers. And what that wideness allows you to do, I don't know if wideness is a word, probably not. It really allows you to skip a bait. So if you thread that onto a jig hook, you can skip that bait really well, whether that's underneath of a dock, maybe it's under an overhanging tree. It's a very good skipping setup, something that I use a lot with that structure jig and that Outcast tackle jig. Now, the next lure is my cleanup bait. It's the bait that I'm going to throw if I cannot figure out how to catch a fish, or if I've caught a lot of fish in an area and they stop biting. This is the next bait that I'm going to pick up, and that is a drop shot. Now, specifically on the drop shot, this is my #1 worm. If you guys have been around this channel, any of my channels before, you know how much I love this color. I love this worm. I have caught what feels like thousands of bass on this worm right here. This is a Robo 6-inch fat worm. I fish it a lot on a drop shot. I also fish it on a shaky head. I've even wacky rigged this thing. This thing has caught me a ton of bass over the years. This particular color is labeled as MM2. I believe that's Margarita Mutilator. And this bad boy is just a really good bait to throw. A really good color. I catch a ton of fish, specifically with a drop shot. A number of years ago, I was fishing a Bassmaster Open event down on Lake Chickamauga. And I had caught a lot of fish on a big worm. I'd caught a lot of fish on a deep diving crankbait. I had kind of fished through this particular area. I picked up this exact worm on a drop shot rig. I casted it to this little offshore ledge that I was fishing. I caught the biggest bass that I caught in the entire tournament, which was over 6 pounds on a drop shot. So a drop shot is a great way to catch big fish, and it gets a lot of bites. And there's a number of ways you can rig it. You can rig it Texas style, where you can really bring it through a lot of cover. You can also nose hook the bait, where you can fish it in a little bit more open water. Now, the thing about it is that all of these baits can be really, really good for you, but they're only going to be good for you if you know where to fish them. So I actually just recently made a video that I'm gonna leave linked right here that really tells you exactly where I like to fish in the middle of summer, which obviously includes the month of June. So if you guys enjoyed this video, you can learn where I'm gonna fish a lot of these baits right here. Hope you guys enjoyed this one. If you did, give it a thumbs up, and I will see you guys in the next one.